Hello everyone, my name is Rowdy and I'm a Technical Account Manager with Synology. Thanks for joining us for this presentation. In this training, we're going to take a look at the best practices to be aware of when installing a DSM operating system, as well as things that you can do when you are restoring your package configurations and getting a NAS up to speed when migrating from one Synology unit to the next. We'll be taking a look at this in three separate parts. First, we'll look at the things that you need to be aware of when you're installing a fresh instance of DSM for the first time. After that, we'll look at ways that you can back up your configuration settings and then also restore them at a later date in the event that there's any unplanned outages or unexpected disasters. Finally, we'll also look at ways that you can migrate your data from one Synology unit to the next. Let's get started. We'll kick things off by looking at the things you should be aware of when you're installing a fresh instance of the DSM operating system. There are essentially two different ways that you can install DSM on your Synology NAS, and they can be thought of as the difference between driving a manual versus an automatic transmission on a car. We'll look at the way to install DSM manually, and then we'll look at a way that you can do a batch deployment of DSM to many servers at once with Synology's Central Management System application. After that, we'll talk about some of the next steps that you need to take after you stand up your new instance of DSM, including connecting to a domain controller and also creating new users and groups. Before you get started, the first thing that you're going to want to do is go to the Download Center section on our website and download the appropriate .pat file for that particular Synology model that you're looking to install. Keep in mind that the .pat file for DSM varies from one Synology device to the next. This is because we optimize the DSM package to work best for a given CPU model. And because the CPU can vary from one Synology unit to the next, it's important to make sure that you're downloading DSM for that specific model. Once you have the installation package, there are essentially two different ways that you can get it installed in your Synology NAS. Make sure your NAS is connected to the network, and then you can go to find.synology.com, which is Synology's web assistant, and use that to find the disk station and then begin the installation process. Find.synology.com does require an internet connection, so if you're in an air-gapped network or you're in an area that doesn't have connection to the internet, your best bet to install Synology is to utilize the Synology Assistant desktop client. You can also download this from the Download Center section on our website and then use it to scan your network and find that particular Synology NAS that you're looking to install for. Let's take a look at how this works. Let's take a look at how to install DSM using the find.synology.com domain. Our first step is going to be finding the installation file on the Synology website. Let's assume that I've already populated the drives and powered on my Synology NAS and connected it to the network. Once I've done that, I'll go to the Synology website and I'll highlight the Support tab at the top. From there, I'll see how to get to the Download Center section on the website. We're next going to be asked to specify the specific model of Synology NAS that we're going to be installing for. For this particular demonstration, we're going to be looking at the installation of a DS718 Plus. You'll see that the very first option that pops up is the DSM operating system itself, and you'll see the link for the .pat file over here on the right-hand side of the screen. I've already downloaded this to my computer, so I'm actually going to move on to the find.synology.com domain and begin the installation process from there. I'm going to go up here to the top, and you'll see that I have the Synology Web Assistant bookmarked, but you can also get there by typing in the find.synology.com to any web browser. Once you're there, you just need to say that you want to proceed with the installation process, and it's going to start searching your network looking for available disk station devices that are already connected, powered on, and have the drives inserted. After just a few seconds, you'll see here that we have a disk station available for us to install DSM on, and then these end user license terms will pop up. Make sure you read them and then agree, and the installation process will then get started. Before we officially start the installation process, we'll be brought to a setup page, and that's where we can say that we want to begin the installation now. We're going to get a final warning letting us know that the drives are going to be wiped, and then the installation process will officially begin. So that was a look at how to install DSM using the find.synology.com domain. But what if you're on an air-gapped network, or you're in an area that doesn't have connection to the internet? If that's the case, your best bet is to download Synology using the Synology Assistant desktop client application. This is actually something that we recommend as a best practice for getting DSM onto your new Synology model. You can actually download the desktop client itself from the Download Center section, And you'll see here, we have in the search results for DS718+, we can go to Desktop Utilities, and you'll see that the first item listed is the Synology Assistant application. I've already downloaded this and installed it to my computer, so I'm going to go to my Start menu and pull it up. You'll see here is a list of devices available on my network, and you'll see that one of them has not yet been installed. Yeah, I can also look at the IP address, MAC address, and serial number for this particular NAS device. I'm going to click on it and then click Connect, and that's going to get me to the point where I can begin the process of the installation. It first asks me to accept the end user license agreement, so again, make sure you read those terms, and then it's going to pull up a new window. Once here, just say that you want to begin the process of setting up the Synology NAS, and say that you want to install. It's going to bring up a final warning screen letting you know that the data on the drives in that NAS are going to be wiped, and then the installation process will begin. Let's take a look at a different way to install DSM, this time utilizing the Synology Central Management System application. CMS is a standalone package in the Package Center that you can download and utilize to manage a Synology deployment across multiple sites. This is particularly useful if you have a franchise of retail stores or if you have multiple branch offices that are in different locations. With CMS, you can stand up all of those NAS units at once and configure and install them all in one fell swoop. From there, you can then ship those devices out to their respective end locations where they can be installed and ready for plug and play. This saves you a lot of time and effort so that you don't have to manually configure each one of those NAS units individually. Let's take a look at how this works. Let's now take a look at how to install DSM to a mass deployment of Synology devices using the Synology Central Management System application. I'm in CMS right here, and you'll notice that there currently aren't any servers connected to this particular device. Let's also assume that I'm at the corporate headquarters of a chain of convenience stores known as Fast and Easy. The first step is we need to go to the Server tab on the left-hand side and say that I want to add a new server and then also install DSM at the same time. Once I've confirmed that I want to do that, it's going to ask me if I want to install servers from my local network. I'll say that I do. Now, before we started this, I already added drives to my Synology units, powered them on, and connected them to the network. So after just a few seconds, you'll see here a list of 2 DS718+ units. I'm going to highlight both of them and then confirm that I want to proceed. Next, it's going to ask me if I want to manually upload my installation file. I do because I already downloaded the .pat file and then earlier put that file into the shared folder on my NAS called Installation Files. So once that's all done, I'll proceed. And next, it's going to ask me for a default password. Now, keep in mind this is going to be the password for all of these NAS units when they first are plugged in. So we strongly recommend changing that password after you stand up the devices for the first time. You'll also notice that the default username is admin, so you're going to want to change that as well. For the server name, I'm going to name it Fast and Easy after my convenience store chain. And what that's going to do is it's going to name each NAS Fast and Easy 1, Fast and Easy 2, and so on. You'll also notice we have the option to create an SHR, Synology Hybrid RAID, upon installation. But I'm not going to do that because Synology does not recommend using SHR for business class deployments. We'll get into the reason why that is later on in this presentation. Once I've confirmed those settings there, it's going to ask me if I want to proceed and also let me know that the data in the drives are going to be wiped. I'm going to confirm that I acknowledge this, and then I'm going to say that I want to get my IP address from a DHCP server. Once all that's done, the installation process will begin. After a few minutes, you'll see here that the installation process was successful on both DS718+ units. I'm going to click Finish, and then you'll notice that both of those units are now within the CMS application, with the particular NAS that we're in right now acting as the CMS host. Now that we've successfully installed DSM on both of these Synology units, we next need to configure certain settings and other policies and packages onto these NAS units before we deploy them out to their final destination. We're going to do this by going to the Group and Policy tab on the left-hand side and say that we want to create a new policy. I'm going to call this policy AutoBlock IP. Now, what AutoBlock IP is going to do is it's going to notice if the same IP address is trying to unsuccessfully log into that NAS unit using some form of brute force attack. The NAS will then recognize that this is happening and block that IP address from being able to log in once more. We recommend doing this on your Synology NAS so that you can protect yourself in the event that you're subject to a brute force attack. We'll go over here to the Enable Auto Block section, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say that I want to block an IP address from logging in after they've had 5 unsuccessful login attempts within 5 minutes. I'm then going to choose to block that IP address for a period of 5 days. I'll click OK, and you can see the policy is created here. And then I'm going to go up to the server group and say that I want to apply now. That's then going to deploy that policy to all of the servers in my group. Now that we've deployed the policy, let's go into the server and make sure that the policy successfully carried over into these Synology NAS units. I'm going to go over here to the Fast and Easy One server. You can see here on my network that that is the server name that we're on. And then next, I'm going to go in Control Panel and go to the security settings. We're going to go over here to Account, and you'll see here that Auto Block IP has already been enabled for this device. It's also been enabled with the same settings we had earlier, so it's going to block an IP address after unsuccessfully logging in 5 times within 5 minutes, and it's going to keep that IP address blocked for a period of 5 days. Now that I've successfully installed DSM and also configured these Synology NAS units, the next step is going to be shipping these units out to the respective stores in my convenience store chain. After that's done, I'm going to want to reconfigure those NAS units so that they have the proper IP address and network settings on my CMS host unit. I can do this manually by going to Add Server and then say that I want to upload a server list. What this is going to do is it's going to bring me to a screen here that has settings such as the IP address, port, and server name for all of these NAS devices. I can put together an Excel spreadsheet and then upload it, and that will manually reconfigure the data in my CMS application. Another way that I can do that is I can just manually edit all of these NAS devices myself. I can just click on a NAS unit individually, click Edit, and then it's going to pull up a screen where I can change the IP address for this particular device. I can also do this for a Quick Connect ID. One other thing that you might want to do is you can add a description for each one of these NAS units so that you know where they're located. For instance, let's say that this particular device is going to be located at our Post Falls, Idaho convenience store chain location. Once you've successfully installed DSM on your NAS device, the next step is going to be creating a storage volume so that you can actually store data on that particular unit. Doing so, you're going to need to select a RAID type for that storage volume. You can choose RAID 1, 5, 6, 10, or Synology's hybrid RAID technology. After that, you're going to want to create new users and also configure your network settings, which you can do in the control panel. Some environments are going to want to integrate their existing domain controllers into the Synology NAS unit. You can actually utilize your existing Active Directory environment, point it to the Synology NAS, and that way you can continue using the same users and group settings that you already have on Active Directory in the Synology NAS environment itself. Before we move on, we want to highlight an important point when it comes to RAID. Although Synology does offer our Synology hybrid RAID technology, we don't recommend using this in a business class environment. The reason why is because Synology hybrid RAID stripes across drives of different sizes. While this is convenient if you have a collection of drives that you want to use and they are of different size and you want to take advantage of the full amount of storage available to you, it does add a bit of a performance dent. For this reason, we strongly recommend using standard RAID types such as RAID 1, 5, 6, or 10 in all business class use cases of Synology. This includes government and nonprofit environments as well. Let's now take a look at some of the settings when you first set up a new instance of DSM. We're going to go over here to the Fast and Easy One server that we installed during the CMS demo. And the first thing that we're going to do is look at how we can change the IP address for this NAS. If I go to the network interface, you'll see here that I can either get my IP address automatically from a DHCP server, or on this screen I can choose to enter in a manual IP address configuration. Let's next look at how to create a new user for a particular NAS. All I have to do is go to the user section on Control Panel, and then I click Add New User. From here, all I need to do is give my user a name and a default password, and they'll be ready to get started. There are also some advanced options you can have when you're setting up new users. One is you can force the users to set a new password if I, as the administrator, reset the password for them. And I can also enable certain password strength rules and set a password expiration date. You're also allowed to set up a two-factor authentication, which you can do for all administrators of this NAS or for all of the users in the NAS in general. Let's now take a look at how to set up some security settings for the NAS when I first get started. If I scroll down here to the Security tab, you'll see at the top we have a section where we can create, edit, and configure firewall rules. I'll go to Edit Rules, and then I'm going to say that I want to create a new firewall rule. And this is the screen where I would be able to do that. Next, let's take a look at where you would go if you want to install or replace an SSL certificate. We go to the Certificate section of the Security tab, and then if we click Add, you'll see here I can either add a new certificate or replace an existing one. Now, let's look at how we're going to be able to join a domain controller to the NAS. If I go to domain/LDAP here on the control panel, it'll ask if I want to join a domain, and then all I need to do is specify my domain name and also provide the DNS server address for that particular domain. There's a few other settings we would configure, and then we'd be able to get the domain pointed to the Synology NAS so I can continue using the domain settings I have right now. You can also do this for an LDAP client. So let's review everything that we've learned so far. First, we looked at how to install DSM manually by downloading the appropriate .pat file from the Download Center section on our website, and then using either the find.synology.com domain or Synology Assistant. Remember, we recommend using Synology Assistant as a best practice. After that, we looked at how to do a mass installation of DSM across multiple Synology devices using the Synology Central Management System application. Finally, we looked at the next steps that are involved after you install a new instance of the DSM operating system, including selecting a RAID type, creating users, and joining to your existing domain. We all know accidents happen, and server rooms are no exception. Let's say hypothetically you just hired an intern and they accidentally pulled out some drives that they weren't supposed to from a Synology NAS, resulting in a crash of your entire array. If something like this happens, what can you do to get all that data back so that the NAS is configured the way it was before that accident occurred? We'll take a look at this in 3 separate parts. First, we'll look at the way that you can back up the configuration settings on DSM itself, including things like shared folders, users, and groups. After that, we'll look at how you can restore the package settings so that you can get those packages and applications back up and running the way that they were beforehand. Finally, we're going to take a look at the one application to rule them all, Synology Active Backup for Business. This is one of our most popular packages in DSM, and relinking your tasks so that you can keep your versioning history and configuration settings requires just a couple of extra steps that we'll highlight in this section. Let's first take a look at how to back up the DSM configuration itself, including your users, groups, shared folders, and domain controller settings. All of this can be done in Control Panel at the click of a button, and you can save that configuration straight to your computer. We recommend doing this as soon as you stand up and configure your new instance of DSM, and then make sure that you have a safe copy of that located elsewhere, preferably somewhere that's off-site, so that you can restore it in the event of a disaster. Also keep in mind that there are some extra steps involved if you need to restore user home configurations for Synology Drive or your Quick Connect ID settings. Let's take a look at how to back up the DSM configuration on this NAS right here. I'm going to go over to my user groups, and you're going to see all of my users listed for this particular NAS device. I'm also going to show you my shared folders, which you can see listed right here. Now keep these in mind. What we're going to do is go to the Update and Restore section on Control Panel, and then I'm going to select Backup Configuration right here. It's going to let me know all the things that are going to be backed up, including my shared folders, users, groups, and domain settings. And then once I confirm that I understand, it'll begin the backup process. You'll see within seconds that that backup file is downloaded straight to your computer. Now that we've successfully backed up a configuration, let's go through the process of restoring one on a brand new NAS device. I'm here in a different instance of DSM, and you can see here if we go over to shared folders that there's no shared folders installed on this NAS. So this is a brand new instance of the operating system. We'll scroll down to Update and Restore once again, and this time I'm going to say that I want to restore a configuration. It's going to ask me to find that backup configuration that we had earlier, so I'm going to search my computer for it, and then I'm going to press Open and then say that I want to proceed. Once there, I'm going to say that I want to overwrite any conflicting settings that are made here, and then I'm also going to say that I want to restore all of the settings that were backed up. It'll then have a final window pop up asking if I still want to proceed, and I'll let them know that I do. After a few seconds, that restoration process will be complete. To show you that it was successful, let's go back to the shared folder section, and you can see there are all the shared folders that we backed up earlier. We can also go to the users and see all of our users from before. Those of you who are experienced with Synology are probably using it for more than just as a basic file server. To back up the configurations of a DNS server, Synology Surveillance Station, or any of the other packages that you can use in DSM, you're going to want to use the Hyper Backup application. A lot of you might be familiar with using Hyper Backup to back up the data on your Synology NAS, but that's not all that it can do. You can also back up application settings so that if you do have a crashed instance of DSM, you can restore those settings back to the way that they were before that disaster took place. This process is fairly straightforward, and all you need to make sure is that you have a Hyper Backup task and that that backup is being sent to a different NAS or to a cloud repository. Let's now go through the process of restoring package configuration settings using Hyper Backup. The first step here is going to be to create a backup task. So we're going to go to the Hyper Backup application, and then we're going to select a repository to send this backup to. I'm going to use Synology's own C2 cloud storage service as my destination for the backup task. It's then going to bring me into a window where it's going to ask me to log into C2. Now I'm already logged into C2 on this particular computer, so it's actually going to bring me straight to the screen that's going to ask me to authorize that I grant permission for my NAS to access this particular C2 account. Once I've done that, the next step is going to be to name the backup task. We're going to call this one Spot Webinar Demo, and then say that we want to proceed from there. Now the next screen is going to ask if we want to back up any data. I actually don't want to do any of that for the purposes of this demonstration, so we're going to click Next and move on. The next screen is going to ask which application settings we want to back up. So we're going to back up the Synology Drive Server application, which also has the shared folder Test Folder 1 and Test Folder 2. We'll then name the backup task here, and we're going to leave all of the settings on this particular screen as the defaults for now. At the very end, we're going to be asked to set a rotation policy. I'm going to say that I want to enable Smart Recycle and have the max versions be kept at 256. From there, we'll select Apply. And then after just a few seconds, it's going to ask if we want to back up the task now. I'll confirm that we do, and that backup process will start. We're now going to do the process of restoring that Hyper Backup task. You'll see here we're actually in a new instance of DSM, and I can go over here to type in Drive on the Synology Package Center. You'll see it's not even installed yet. We'll then hop over to the Hyper Backup application itself, and you'll notice that there are no backup tasks on this device, which is also an indication that this is a brand new instance of DSM. What we're going to do from here is we're going to go to Restore, and we're going to restore a data backup task. And then we're going to say that we want to restore from existing repositories. It's going to pull up a list of the locations where my data backup task might be, and I'm going to select Synology's C2 Cloud Service. Again, it's going to bring up a login screen, and keep in mind that I'm already logged in on this computer. It's then going to ask me to authorize access for my NAS to connect with this C2 account, and I'll grant that permission. And then it's going to pull up a folder of all of the different backup tasks that I can restore. I'm going to go down this list, and then we're going to select the Spot Webinar Demo task that we created earlier, and then say that I want to proceed. The next screen is going to ask if I want to restore any data. Now for the purposes of this demonstration, we're just going to restore the application settings, so I'm going to click Next on that. You'll see the application is right here for us to restore with Test Folder 1 and Test Folder 2, the Synology Drive server. We'll click that and click Next, and then it's going to let us know that the service will be stopped while this restoration process initiates. After that, we'll click Apply, and then the restoration process will begin. Let's now go into Package Center of this same NAS after the restoration process has been completed, and we'll type in Synology Drive once again. You'll see that this time Synology Drive is actually installed on the NAS, so that restoration process was successful. We can also go and pull up the Drive application itself, and from there, you'll notice that we have Test Folder 1 and Test Folder 2, letting us know that the restoration process was a success. Those of you familiar with Synology will probably recognize this logo very well. Active Backup for Business is our license-free backup software that lets you back up PCs, servers, and VMs to your NAS at no additional cost. One of the key elements of a backup plan is to make sure that you have a breadth of versions of your backup data over time. So if your DSM instance crashes, what can you do to get those backup versions back? Luckily, there is a way that you can relink those backup tasks in Active Backup for Business. You can do this by pulling the data down using Hyper Backup and then selecting the relink option in the Active Backup for Business application. That way you can keep your versioning history and also have all your configuration settings go back to the way that they were before that instance took place. Let's take a look at how this works. I'm going to start here in a particular instance of DSM, and I'm going to go to Hyper Backup and then Restore from my C2 account. As we did earlier, we're going to go to Restore from Existing Repositories, select Synology C2, and it's going to pull up that login screen once again. Keep in mind, I'm already logged in on this computer, so I'm not going to have to enter in my username or credentials right here, but I am going to have to authorize that my NAS can connect to this C2 account. Once I've authorized that and I'm ready to proceed, it's going to pull up a list of backup tasks that I can choose from. Now I'm going to select a backup task called DS3617XS-C2. I know that this particular task has a VM that has been backed up in Active Backup for Business. It's going to ask me to enter in my encryption password, so I'm going to set that right now. And then I'm going to say that I want to proceed. It's going to ask if I want to restore any configurations on DSM. Now for this, I just want to get that VM back up. So I'm going to say that I don't want to restore any of that for now and click Proceed. Now we're going to restore this as C2 data. So I'm going to go to this C2 backup folder here because that is where the VM backup is hosted. And then I'm going to say that I want to restore that. And then we're going to click Apply. Now that we've successfully restored that data from the C2 account, the next step is going to be relinking that data in the Active Backup for Business application. I'm going to pull it up here, and you'll see on the overview screen that I don't have any virtual machines backed up on this particular NAS just yet. The way that we relink a backup task is we're going to go to the Storage tab on the left-hand side here, and we're going to click Relink at the top. We'll see that shared folder that we restored earlier using Hyper Backup, and then I'm going to say that I want to relink that particular backup task. It's going to ask me to confirm that I want to proceed. And within a few seconds, that relinking process has been complete. To show that it was successful, we can click on over here on the left-hand side. We'll go over to the overview page, and we'll look and see that we do have one virtual machine backed up now. So that relink was successful. If we're interested to see what virtual machine was relinked, I can go to the virtual machine tab on the left-hand side, and notice by the check mark that this particular Linux VM, Elementary vCenter HA, has been successfully relinked and is now being backed up, and also allows me to keep my versioning history from before. Let's review everything that we learned in this section of the presentation. First, we took a look at how to back up our DSM configuration by going to the Configuration Backup option in Control Panel. All we need to do is press a button, and then we will be able to back up the entire shared folder, users, and other configuration settings for the DSM OS itself. We then took a look at how to use Hyper Backup to back up our application settings for any of the packages that we might have downloaded in Package Center. And then we took an in-depth look at how to relink an existing backup task for Active Backup for Business so that we can keep our versioning history and also configure those backups to be in the same settings that they were before that disaster took place. Now, think back to that intern we talked about in the last section who pulled out all those drives from your NAS and crashed your array. Let's say instead that that intern walks into your server room and accidentally spills Mountain Dew all over your Synology NAS. If you have a NAS that's destroyed, what can you do to get that NAS back up and running to the way that it was before? In this section, we'll talk about things to be aware of when you're moving from one Synology NAS to the other, whether that new Synology NAS is the same model as the one you're currently using, or if you're upgrading to a brand new Synology NAS model. After that, we'll take a look at the migration system application, which is particularly useful for areas when you are transferring data from an older Synology NAS to a new source NAS device. Going back to that incident where your intern accidentally spilled Mountain Dew all over your server, let's say that the drives are intact even though the NAS was fried. If this is the case, you can actually use the exact same drives that you're using right now and not have to install or configure DSM. All you need to do is make sure that you're getting the exact same model of Synology NAS, and then make sure both units are powered off and insert the drives one after the other. You want to make sure that the drives are populated in the same order on the new NAS as they were on the older one. Once that's done, all you need to do is power on the new device, and the device will recognize that DSM is already installed on the drives themselves, and you'll be back up and running the way that you were before. So that's what you would do if you were looking to move those drives to the exact same model of Synology NAS. But what if you're looking to upgrade your NAS device to a new one? If that's the case, you could theoretically use the same drives, but you need to make sure of two things. First, make sure that the drives themselves are compatible with the new device by checking the compatibility list on our website. The other thing you need to be aware of is the CPU of that upgraded NAS unit. Keep in mind, DSM is dependent on the CPU itself. So if the CPU has changed from one model to the next, then you'll need to reinstall DSM and restore the configurations. Your only option at that point would be to use the recovery methods we talked about earlier, either with the backup configuration and control panel, or using Hyper Backup to restore your package settings. If you're looking to add a new NAS device, while the old one is actually still functional, you can have one of two ways. Either use the recovery methods we talked about before, or you can use a tool called Synology Migration Assistant. If both of the NASs are still functional, if the old NAS hasn't been fried or destroyed in any way and you can still use it, but you do want to upgrade to a new one, you can use a really handy tool called Synology Migration Assistant. This requires that both of the NAS units will be powered on, and then you can discover the source NAS, the older one, from the destination NAS, which is your new NAS device. You can then perform a block-by-block transfer from the source NAS to the destination so that all of the configuration settings, package settings, and other configurations in that particular instance of DSM all carry over from the old to the new. When all that's done, you can still utilize the source device. This is a copy of the data, so the data isn't wiped on the original one. Or if you want to, you can reconfigure that old device and reinstall DSM on it for a different use case. Let's take a look at how to use Synology Migration Assistant. What we're going to do is we're going to transfer data from a NAS called Webinar 1 over to a destination NAS called Webinar 2. For this demonstration, Webinar 1 will be our old NAS server, and Webinar 2 will be the brand new one. We'll first go into the Synology Migration Assistant application itself, which you can download from the Package Center. We need to make sure that we're doing this on the destination NAS. Again, that's Webinar 2, which is the new NAS device that we're looking to clone all the data to. Once that wizard pulls up, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to look up the particular Synology server in our network that we want to migrate from. Again, keep in mind this is going to be called Webinar 1. So I'm going to pull up this list right here, and after it searches the network for a few seconds, you'll see a list of all the servers in my network. We're going to select Webinar 1 from this list, and then I'm going to enter in my username and password for this particular NAS device, for the source NAS. And that's pretty much it. All you need to do now is click Apply, and it's going to bring up a final warning screen to let you know that the services on the source NAS are going to stop during this migration process. And it's also going to let you know that for the destination server, all of the current configurations and settings are going to be overwritten and replaced. Make sure that you acknowledge this and keep this in mind before you begin the migration process. And then just before you're about to proceed, it's going to ask you one last time to enter in the password for the destination NAS device. We do this for security settings. Once I've entered in that password and pressed submit, the migration process will begin. Once the migration process has been complete, you'll see here that we're going to be asked if we want to keep the services running on the source server or if we want to stop all services now and disable that source server. We can choose either option. I'm going to choose to keep it running for now so that I can continue using it later on. However, you will need to make some manual configuration settings later on in the source NAS to make sure that there's no conflict of file services between Webinar 1 and Webinar 2. Once the device is restarted, I'll be prompted to log in with my credentials to the Webinar 2 destination NAS. You'll see that as soon as I log in, the first thing that pops up is the Migration Assistant application itself. It's going to display a couple of warning signs here, letting me know that because I kept my services running from before, I might need to block my connection on my source NAS and then also reconfigure my network ID and quick connect settings on that NAS as well. So just keep those things in mind. If you are going to keep running the services on the source NAS, you don't want to have any conflicts. But after that, the migration process has been successful. And we'll see here, if we go to the file station, that we have shared folders from the Webinar 1 NAS that have all carried over successfully into our destination NAS, Webinar 2. Let's recap everything we learned in this section where we talked about migrating DSM from one Synology unit to another. If you're looking to migrate to the same model, you can do so just by swapping the drives. Make sure that the devices are both powered off and that the models match exactly the same, but DSM is installed on the drives themselves, so you can just power on that new device and you'll be ready to go. If you're looking to upgrade to a different model of Synology, you need to make sure that the drives are compatible and also that the CPU hasn't changed going from one Synology unit to the next. If either of those are the case, then you're going to need to use the backup configurations we talked about earlier, where you utilize hyper backup and also backing up through the control panel to move that data from one NAS to the other. And if both of the NAS units are still functional and if they both support the Migration Assistant application, you can utilize Synology Migration Assistant, which is a step-by-step wizard that will provide a block file transfer from the source NAS to the destination NAS so that the destination will mirror all the components of the original NAS unit. Before we conclude this training session, let's recap everything that we've learned in this presentation so far, and then we'll leave you with some additional words of wisdom. Going back to the start of this training, we first talked about how to do a fresh install of DSM on a brand new Synology device. We looked at the difference between installing manually versus installing in a batch deployment with Synology CMS, and then we talked about some of the next steps that you need to be aware of when you first stand up a new instance of the DSM operating system. After that, we talked about ways to restore DSM and package configurations, using either the backup configuration option in Control Panel or the Hyper Backup application. We also took a look at how you can relink Active Backup for business tasks so that you can keep your versioning history and also your configuration settings for backup tasks. Finally, we looked at how to migrate DSM from one Synology device to another, whether you're looking to migrate from the same model or if you're looking to migrate to a completely new model of the Synology unit. In addition to that, we looked at the Migration Assistant application, which allows you to perform a block-by-block file transfer from a source NAS to a destination NAS, which allows you to have a completely new configuration that retains all of the same settings as that original server. Before we close out this training, here's some additional tips that we want you to keep in mind. First, make sure that you are always using standard RAID if you're in a business class application. Synology Hybrid RAID will decrease the performance somewhat, and we don't want you to have that penalty if you're in a business, nonprofit, or government agency. If you have any questions about anything that we've touched on this training so far, make sure that you visit our website or our knowledge base. And if you're not able to find the answers there, feel free to submit a support ticket, and one of our support reps will be happy to assist you. Finally, and this is the most important point that we want to stress here today, always make sure that you're backing up your data. All of the restoration options we talked about during this training require a backup in order to restore that data to where it was before. So to save yourself time, money, and emotional stress, make sure that you're backing up your data and also storing a copy of that data in a safe off-site location. Thanks so much for taking the time to walk through this presentation with us. We hope you'll find these techniques and tips useful the next time you're looking to install, restore, or migrate your Synology data. If you need any assistance with anything that we've talked about in this presentation, reach out to your Synology account manager and they'll be happy to assist. Thanks once again from all of us here at Synology, and we look forward to seeing you in the next training.